Hello everyone, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for the Farm to School Grant Team Lead Training. My name is Travis Hearn. I will be joined today by Carla Garcia, one of the grants officers who works with the Farm to School Grant Program. Today is February 6th, 2019, and we are looking forward to getting started with your instructions for the review process. Before we truly begin, I want to linger on this slide for a little while just so people can see this information if they're having trouble hearing me or if they have trouble with ReadyTalk at any point. Remember that the audio comes through your computer speakers, so if you're having an issue with hearing me, if maybe you can't hear my voice well, just turn up the volume on your computer speakers and that should hopefully take care of it. If you're having a different issue, then often changing browsers, especially if you're using Internet Explorer and changing to Firefox or Google Chrome, can fix the issue. And Aaron Heisem, one of my colleagues, is going to be putting in the chat box some information for people who can call in if they're still having audio issues through the computer. If for some reason you experience issues with ReadyTalk at any time during the training, you can call this help number, 800-843-9166, to get assistance from the ReadyTalk helpline. If you want to jot that number down really quickly before we go on, I'll stay on this slide for just another moment, and then we'll move on to some more information about this conference. During the entire presentation, we'll be accepting comments and questions via the chat box. We will also be recording this webinar and sending it out via email. Everyone should have hopefully received a link to view the webinar from Monday, the Farm to School 101 training. We'll be using the same method to distribute the information from this webinar, as well as including a PDF of the slides and attachments after the webinar is over. ReadyTalk also offers a survey after the webinar. If you take that survey, it helps us know who attended and what you thought of the session. This is our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about the background of the Farm to School Grant Program. We'll talk a little bit about what you can expect from the grant cycle. Though you are only interested in the review part, you'll only be participating in the review part. It may be good to know what the entire grant cycle looks like. Then we'll dive a little deeper into the review process, where your job is extremely important for us. And then we'll go through what you can expect to see when you look at your grant applications for review. We'll talk about which systems you use to review applications. Carla will help with tips for success. Then we'll go over a quick recap, and at the end we'll answer those questions that have gone into the chat box. All right. Before we start with the review process, we'll go with the Farm to School Grant Program background. The authorizing legislation for this program comes from the Richard B. Russell National School Lunch Act, Section 243. Each year since 2013, the Farm to School Grant Program has awarded up to $5 million, but in fiscal year 2019, we're very excited to have the opportunity to award $7.5 million, and this is another reason why the role of the reviewers is extremely important, because we anticipate that with extra money available, we may be making more grant awards than we have in the past. So helping us choose the best from amongst the many applications we receive is why we very much need your help. These are some of the activities on this slide that grantees may be participating in. We've spoken a little bit on the Farm to School 1-to-1 webinar about the details of the Farm to School Grant Program, about what actions grantees may perform while they're using their grant, and we'll speak a little bit more about that when we talk about the grant types in just a moment. These are the eligible entities. The important thing to note about this slide is that this information is contained in the request for applications, which was the document that all of the grantees received when they were in the application stage to know what information they needed to submit. And this information is also going to be distributed to you. The request for applications will be available for all of the reviewers to read, and in fact we recommend that you do read that document before really sinking your teeth into the applications. You'll be seeing, you may see grants of any of these three types: planning, implementation, or training. I want to note that each team will only be responsible for one type of grant. You will see, everyone in your team will see only planning or only implementation or only training grants. Just a brief recap of each of these. Planning grants are for applicants who don't have extensive experience with farm to school activities. They may have seen Farm to School in place in adjacent school districts or counties, or they may work with organizations that execute Farm to School activities, but don't actually have any history with this themselves. This grant is to get them started, to give them a little bit of a resource for them to use while they prepare to build a robust Farm to School system. The implementation grant is for applicants who have moved beyond the planning phase, and they are, as it says, implementing Farm to School activities. And this grant is, the implementation grant is designed as a resource to let these grantees expand their activities, perhaps bring in more organizations, or perform new actions. And then training grants are for organizations that bring entities, attendees to a training, and then the attendees leave that training with new information that they can use to strengthen Farm to School activities in their own areas. Now I'll talk briefly about the grant cycle as a whole. I want to emphasize during this section that team leads and reviewers are participating in the review process part of this, but it may be interesting to have this bird's eye view of what the whole process looks like. Our fiscal year 19 grant cycle has experienced some delays recently, but we're still very optimistic that we'll be able to follow the timeline that you see on this slide. The RFA came out in October, and applicants had until December to submit their applications. We're starting the training, and we'll be sending out applications now in early February, and then through the middle and late part of February and into the middle of March will be the review period, including the individual review and the team review. And then throughout March and April, we'll be using those scores that you have sent and evaluated, and then we'll use those to make selections, which will be announced in June. The decision criteria are the scores that you submit to us, and then the priorities, such as geographic diversity and other priorities that are unique to each fiscal year. And then we rank those according to the average scores, which again are the scores that we will receive from team leads and reviewers. And then we rank those to find what are the highest scoring applications, and we may make some adjustments based on making sure that we reach our priorities. After the scores are received and analyzed, the list is sent to the selection official, who may request additional information about the geographic diversity and making sure we're meeting those priorities before ultimately approving that list, and then leading us to have the awards announced in June. Now we'll move in and talk about the review process. These are the team lead responsibilities. Much of this content was also presented to reviewers. So when you go and receive your team assignment and then you're speaking to your reviewers, they will have almost all of the same information that you've received as far as the review process goes. But there are several responsibilities that are unique to team leads. The sign and submit a conflict of interest form is for everyone. I want to really emphasize this step because if we do not have your conflict of interest form on file, we won't be able to grant access to the applications for you to read and review. So if you think you have not submitted your conflict of interest form yet, please let us know. You can email the Farm to School inbox where you've been receiving communications up to this point, and we'll be able to let you know if you've submitted it or send you a new form if you need to sign it and get it back to us. You'll independently review around 10 proposals. That also is for both team leads and team members. And you'll submit scores and comments using PartnerWeb. Now the first step here that's truly unique for team leads is monitoring and providing quality control for feedback submitted by team members. The team members will be doing their best work, and then team leads will be checking on them and making sure that they're making progress, that their scores make sense, that if they put a score that seems unusually low or unusually high, that they have an explanation for that score. And the team lead will be responsible for scheduling the team meetings while all 10 team members will participate, and potentially adjusting scores based on the feedback received in those team meetings. The team lead is also the only member of each team that has to submit an activity checklist, and this individual will serve as a point of contact for each team. At the end of the review process, the team lead will also complete the reviewer feedback survey, and we take the results of this survey seriously. We have implemented changes this fiscal year based on feedback we've received on that survey in the past, such as shortening the length for proposal narratives and requiring fewer attachments. Each reviewer will be on a 3-person team, and each of you will be assigned as a team lead. Each team, as I mentioned, will be assigned a grant type, either training, implementation, or planning. We are not going to mix up grant types. No one will be seeing half implementation, half planning, or half training and half implementation. Everyone will have all of their applications of the same type. Next week, the week of February 11th, our goal is to distribute applications to reviewers and then have reviewers and team leads download and skim those applications for conflicts of interest. I'll speak more about conflicts of interest in a moment, but basically if you see any sort of financial or personal interest in the applicant, it's important to let the farm to school know, and then the farm to school team know through the email, and we can swap out those applications no problem. But it's important that you let us know if you see any possible conflicts well in advance. Then the following week, February 19th, we'll begin the review process in earnest, and that will run through March 15th. Breaking that down further, February 19th to March 1st will be the individual review period. You may have noticed that February 19th is a Tuesday. That is because President's Day falls on February the 18th, and we will begin the review process formally the day after President's Day. And then the team panel review will begin March 4th and run for 2 weeks until March 15th. To prepare for the review, it's important to check the materials that you'll be using throughout and gain a little bit of context for what applicants may say in their applications. One important way of doing this is reviewing the fiscal year 19 request for applications. This was the document that laid out what was necessary to submit a complete grant application, and the information that's in each application is likely to make significantly more sense once you've looked over the RFA yourself. We'll also make available several reference materials, including the score sheet that you'll use to assign scores to each application, along with point allocation guidance and projects that involve one-sheeters. These are just projects that let you know what types of activities might grantees have if they state that they're doing a particular type of project. Also, we ask that before the review process formally begins, you access PartnerWeb to make sure you're familiar with the system, that your logon works, and that we're able to troubleshoot any issues well before it affects the review timeline. And check that, get into Watchdocs. This says download applications. It should say access applications. I'll speak more about this in a moment, but we prefer that you not download applications to a computer or print these applications. These are some of the review materials, the reference materials that I mentioned. There are 3 different score sheets, one for each grant type. The one on this page is a training template. You'll be able to reference a unique score sheet depending on what your grant type is, but this gives you an idea of what you'll see on that sheet. You'll see a description of the section, how many points it's worth, and then what your criteria are for judging that section. And then to the right, what I've zoomed in on here is the score breakdown. I want to note that you can give any type of score in between these numbers. You do not have to give only a 15 or a 12 or a 9. You could assign a section a 14 or an 8 or any number within that range. This is what appears on the left side of the, or this is rather your criteria for judging what type of numerical score you want to give. Excellent is the absolute highest rating, and this is for just an absolutely exemplary application if it's detailed in a relevant way and just has very many strengths and no weaknesses. And these range from excellent to unresponsive, with the lower scores having fewer strengths and more weaknesses, until at unresponsive, the narrative either did not address the criteria in that category at all, or their information was completely irrelevant and had nothing to do with the category. To give you an idea of how competitive these applications are and what type of quality you'll see when you're reviewing them, these were applications that were considered high scoring in previous years. So if in fiscal year 18, if a grant had a score below any of these scores, it was less likely to be recommended for review, unless possibly it hit one of the priorities of one of the fiscal year 18 priorities or the geographic diversity priority. So for a planning grant or an implementation grant, if the application didn't receive at least a high B, then it was likely not moving on to the next stage of the review process. And for training grants, if it didn't receive 90 or a low A, then it also was not advanced to the next step in the process. Here's an additional reference material. This is important for team leads to note because only the team lead will complete an activity checklist. This helps USDA understand what kind of information is contained in the application. It will not impact selections, and it is not a scoring document. It is simply to say what type of information this application contains. For the independent review, this phase of the review process will run from February 19th to March 1st, during which time reviewers should work on their own to evaluate each application. We ask that you not speak to your team members during this time. We want your completely raw, unfiltered opinion of this application based on what your impression of it is with no external input. The applications will be distributed via a secure system called Watchdocs. You'll receive an email with the link to access these applications next week. And we ask that you log into Watchdocs and skim all these applications early on. And we have next Friday on here as the date by which we'd like you to look through all of the applications. If you see any conflicts of interest, please inform the Farm to School team at farmtoschool@usda.gov. We'll be able to move applications around so that you don't have to deal with that conflict. Here is the additional guidance on conflicts of interest that I promised earlier. In general, if there's a financial or other relationship with the grant applicant, you're looking at a conflict of interest. And then at that point, it's time to contact the Farm to School team and let us know. If you even think there might be a chance that there's a conflict of interest, better to let us know. Definitely better safe than sorry on this. We really have no problem swapping out applications, and we are happy to make sure we do everything we can to avoid any conflicts. Additionally, let me mention the conflict of interest waiver one more time. If you have not received this form or if you have not completed this form, please do so as soon as possible and submit it to the Farm to School team at farmtoschool@usda.gov. Continuing with the independent review, as I mentioned before, you're prohibited from discussing the proposals with others. Even the members of your team who are looking at the exact same applications you're looking at, please do not speak to them at this time. There is a moment set aside for that during the review process, during the team panel phase. You will have that chance to discuss the applications and complete this entire process, the independent review, by March 1st. We ask that every team member have their information submitted by March 1st in the morning so that team leads will have a chance to glance over those and make sure that everything looks good, that there aren't any scores that stand out as being unusually high or unusually low, that team members submitted good-looking feedback along with their scores to make sure that everything agrees. Then the team review period will begin. It begins March 4th and runs through March 15th for 2 full weeks. During this time, your role will be to facilitate group discussions via conference calls. It's up to you how you want to schedule the call. Everyone's availability differs, but it's the team lead's responsibility to negotiate with their team and figure out a time that will work for everybody. If you want to cover everything in one 3-hour call, then you can feel free to do that. If you want to cover everything in 3 1-hour calls, that's also a possibility. You can spread the calls around, you can do the calls all at once, but we recommend that you allot at least 3 hours total. If you need to do 6 half-hour calls, that's 3 hours. If that's enough time to cover everything in the applications, then go for it. On each initial call, you'll be joined by a program representative who will help you get started and discuss the process with you. We will only need to have a program representative on the first call, but we will be available. We will have someone available during any future calls so that you can call on demand and get some assistance in case you need it. It's important for the team leads to contact their team members as soon as they can, not to discuss the grants, but to find a time that works for the team calls. And we will be distributing a spreadsheet to team leads that they can enter that information into by February 15th once they've received their team assignments. During the calls, teams will discuss each of these proposals. So each team reviews approximately 10 applications. Come prepared to discuss scores for each of those applications. Maybe you split it up and only decide to cover 3 applications at a time during each call. Be prepared to discuss the applications that you will talk about on that call. After that, team members or team leads can adjust their scores based on what someone says. It's possible that you felt really good about a score when you initially assigned it, but maybe you've had some time away from it, and then you talk to your teammates and it turns out that you misjudged the information in the application, or you misunderstood what the applicant was trying to say, and now with that additional information you want to alter your score. That is fine. Please update that score in PartnerWeb if that's the case. It's not a requirement, but we do encourage you to keep an open mind throughout the process in case you do want to update your scores. And then the team lead, this is a unique step to submit activity checklists on behalf of the team through PartnerWeb. Complete these checklists while you review your application during an independent period. The team lead is, again, the only person required to submit an activity checklist. We will provide a paper copy of the checklist that you can download and print in case you like to check things off on paper. I absolutely understand that. So you can access the checklist through PartnerWeb. And in fact, all of the resources that we are promising to you will be available on PartnerWeb as well. The team leads also have a special responsibility to facilitate the team review meeting. So you're responsible for helping to manage the time and make sure that the discussion stays on track. We recommend allocating an initial 10 minutes for each application, including the score each person gave it, why they gave it that, and what strengths and weaknesses they identified during their review. If there's a lot of disagreement between each of the team members, we define this as a difference of 10 points or more, then go through and discuss the application section by section. This may take a long time, but it is useful and important to make sure that you're completely understanding each other and that the scores most closely reflect the reality of the application. And if anyone decides that they want to change their scores, they can go ahead and go into PartnerWeb and do that while they're on the phone call. And if you encourage your team members to do that, that can make sure that any changes don't get forgotten after the call ends. Now I'll explain what you might see what you definitely will see when you go through each grant application. The grant application looks like this. This is a list from a previous year. It should be correct on future slides, but we have stricken optional attachments. There are no optional attachments this year. There is a limit of 3 support letters and 3 resumes. This is the entire application as it will appear. These are the parts of the application that the team leads and the reviewers need to be concerned with. You can disregard the other sections. That is fine. Note that the table of contents should match up with the information that's contained within the application. And on the next slide, I'll give additional guidance about resumes and support letters. If the applicant has included more than 3 resumes or more than 3 support letters, we ask that you do not review any more than 3. Only review the first 3 resumes or the first 3 support letters to make sure that everyone on your team looks at the same documents. You can disregard the rest. They were warned in the request for applications that no attachments beyond the first 3 resumes or support letters would be considered. So do not review that information if you see a 4th or more of either of those documents. Now you've heard me talk a lot about PartnerWeb and a little bit about Watchdocs up to this point. I'll go into each of those systems in greater detail in the following section, beginning with Watchdocs, which is how you will access your applications. We provide access through Watchdocs because it is a secure way of accessing the applications. You'll receive access beginning with a series of emails. You need not take any action on the first email, but you will get an authentication code in your second email. And on the third email, you will open that and begin navigating to the Farm to School 2019 folder, which is where you'll enter your email address and verification code so that you'll be able to view applications. Applications will be organized within Watchdocs by team. This is where your team number will be important. You'll find your specific folder and view only those applications. Please follow this guidance to refrain from downloading applications to your personal computers or devices. The applications are supposed to be only for your eyes, and this just makes sure that there's no additional copies floating around in cyberspace. The applications will be in PDF form and password protected, and all Watchdocs emails will come from this email address on your screen, messages no reply at watchdocsmail.com. If you haven't received these emails by February 15th, check your spam folder, and if you still don't see them in there, you can contact Anna Aerosmith if your team covers implementation grants, or Carla Garcia if your team covers planning or training grants, and their emails are on the screen. To submit your scores and feedback, you will use PartnerWeb. PartnerWeb is a SharePoint website that USDA uses. If you already have a PartnerWeb account, then you can use your existing login credentials to access the USDA Farm to School grant website. If you do not currently have a PartnerWeb account, then we will sign you up for an account where you'll receive a username and password. This is what the PartnerWeb website will look like. When you first navigate to partnerweb.usda.gov, this is the screen that you will see. You'll log in this area here in the middle of the screen using the username that PartnerWeb sends you, which is almost always first initial, last name. Sometimes there may be a digit or something on the end if someone else with your first initial and last name has an existing account. You'll also receive an email from PartnerWeb containing your password. Save that email because the password is definitely going to be an interesting string of characters and numbers, and it can be difficult to remember. So keep a hold of that email and you can use that password to log in. Accounts will be set up the week of February 11th, and then you should begin receiving access. And if you aren't able to find this email by the time the review period begins, if you can't find the email with your password by the time the review period begins, say you deleted it by accident or filed it away and can't remember where, you can use the forgot password email to have it resent. When you initially log into PartnerWeb itself, this is the screen that will be presented to you. The Program Centers tab at the top will be a drop-down menu. I've circled this area in red, or drawn a rectangle around this area in red. That will be a drop-down menu, and from there you'll select Management, Technology, and Finance Program Area, not OIT. There are two Management, Technology, and Finance Program Area tabs. Select the one that says not OIT in parentheses. That is a part of the Program Center name. You can also search the Partner website by using the search box at the beginning. And if you're wondering how you'll remember all of this information, don't forget that I'll be saving a copy of the slides and sending them out to everybody after this presentation. After you've chosen Management, Technology, and Finance, not OIT, you'll be brought to this screen. And now you can finally see the FM Farm to School Grants option over in the sidebar on the left side of the screen. Choose that, and it will navigate you to this web page. Welcome to the USDA Farm to School Grants Review site. When you see this, you know you're in the right place. And all reviewer support materials will be available on this home page, including the RFA, links to these webinars, PDFs of these slides. All of that information will be available for you. Once you've looked through this page and you've seen everything that you need to see, you'll also notice that there are some directions here. But I'll give you the walkthrough here to make sure that everyone has seen the process and understands what steps they'll take to review their grant applications. Beginning with step 1 over on the left side of the screen. Click on that and it'll take you to where you can find your team and your grant assignments. You'll navigate to this page where you'll see at the top, step 1, find your team and assignments. And you'll notice that this panelist ID area, this column has the user IDs of each of you. It has the first name and last initial. These are some test users right now, but when you log in, it will have you will sort on that column to find your own name and find the information you need to access your score sheets. You'll identify what applications you're assigned by looking at the table on your right next to the team number that you're assigned to. That'll expand the list and reveal your assignments. And then also notice that you can see what grant type you're assigned to. Team 1 on this screen has planning grants. Team 2 on this screen has implementation. And one more reminder that you will receive only one grant type to review. This next screen is from an older version of PartnerWeb. We're in the process of updating the current PartnerWeb website so that it will have this FNS ID field. This field lets you know which grant you're scoring at any given time. It lets you match up the score sheet to a specific application. This part is extremely important for the Office of Community Food Systems. When you enter the FNS ID information on your score sheet, please make sure that it corresponds exactly with the application that you are reviewing. Another field that serves that same function is the applicant name. You will also enter this information on your score sheet, which I will show you in only a few slides. You will enter this information that also helps us match up which score sheet corresponds to which application. After you have gathered all the information that you need from this screen, you can navigate to the Step 2 option on the left side of the screen. I've also drawn a rectangle around the different tabs at the top. Depending on which type of grant you are assigned, you can click on the appropriate tab and that will take you to the same screen, which is this one here. At this point, you will choose the hyperlink Add a Score Sheet. It will say something different depending on what grant type you are assigned. If you have implementation grants, you should have navigated to the tab that has Add a Score Sheet Implementation. For training grants, it will say Add a Score Sheet Training. Click on that hyperlink to begin a new score sheet, which is on this page. And you can see at the top that it has spots for you to enter the team number, the grant ID, which is the FNS ID from the previous page, and the applicant name, which I also noted on the previous page. Please enter the correct information in this score sheet. This lets us know which application you're reviewing and which goes with which score sheet. At the bottom, you'll scroll all the way down and you'll click Save to store this information. If you are not finished, then you can enter 0 in each of these fields, but it has to have some kind of content entered in each field before it will register that it can be saved. It will not let you save unless you have put some sort of information in each of these fields. On the Step 2 page, all of your saved score sheets can be viewed. Team leaders will be able to view the score sheets that team members have filled out, and that's how you'll be able to check whether they have completed the information appropriately and whether their scores make sense. You can sort this list because you may have 10 applications and you aren't sure of which one was which. You can sort on applicant name. You can sort on these headers at the top to help you find ones that are finished or unfinished, or help find particular applicant names, etc. As I mentioned, you can use the score sheets that have been submitted by your team members. You can sort by the team header at the top right to let you more easily find the ones that are exclusive to your team. If you will be a team lead, and you will be responsible for sending your team member an email if they haven't completed their feedback or if their feedback doesn't follow the guidelines. And we have built in some time where we ask you to check in on your teammates around the end of the first week of the grant review to make sure that they are on the right track. And those are the steps for using PartnerWeb. Now that we've spoken through that, I'm going to hand off to my colleague Carla Garcia, who will take you through some tips for success while you're reviewing applications.
All right, thank you, Travis. And yes, as Travis stated, I'm going to be sharing the tips for success of your grant review as a team lead. So obviously, there's some additional roles here, and which we've already covered for the most part. So you want to make sure that you're reviewing the score sheet allocation guide for the scoring of the applications. All the reviewers should be adhering to these guidelines. You can see in the example that the scores have a specific range. So for example, excellent could fall within the range of 17 to 20 points. And then you have very good as example 16, and then good 12, and fair. And so this kind of gives you an idea of how those scores would fall depending upon the quality of the grant itself. You can also see that on one of the slides, if it's unresponsive, if any of the grant sections are unresponsive, then that would fall at 0 points, since obviously there's nothing to critique or review. So we are asking, if that does happen, make a note indicating in your score justification that nothing was included in that specific section, and then, of course, score accordingly. So that goes along with the providing comments section. So anytime you have any specific score, whether it being excellent or unresponsive, you want to make sure you have feedback under the strengths and weaknesses to basically give us some feedback as to why you scored that way. Scoring applications. As a lead reviewer, it's important that you make sure your team has provided written feedback, basically to justify their individual scores for each section. You will have the ability to check their stuff, as we just covered in PartnerWeb, so we're emphasizing that you ensure the comments are provided. Specifically, the reviewer should include strengths or weaknesses to justify each and every single, those big variances of scores for each category. And remember that these reviewer comments and scores are used to submit. Basically, you're going to be entering them into PartnerWeb, but we use those as an agency to debrief and also to provide feedback to our grantees. So it's very important that you make sure that that information is there so that we capture that story, kind of telling us why the different teams scored the way they did. So please make sure you're specifically checking for that, the written feedback. Obviously, we've emphasized that this is important. It's an essential part of the review process, and the proposal strengths and weaknesses are used to support our FNS selections as well. So, we need that information to provide to our FNS officials. So it's also used, as I have already indicated, to give feedback to the applicants. Therefore, it's imperative that the feedback is written in a concise manner. We do ask for proper grammar and punctuation just to make sure that we can make heads and tails of it so we know exactly what it is, and thoughtful feedback so that we can capture a thorough review of the applications and pass it along to our applicants later. So we do have some information here on what would be ideal in terms of written feedback. In this specific slide, you'll see that it should be constructive, and we want to make sure you watch the comments and what's on there. There's some examples of some feedback here, specifically outlining the reviewer's observations. So their examples are like a strength, for example, this school district has strong community partners ready to help implement the project. And so they saw that as a strength. They've outlined that, and they've probably scored accordingly. And then they have various examples. The weakness was the budget narrative did not clearly explain all the proposed project expenses, particularly the supplies and equipment. So it lacked detail, right? But they've specified exactly where it was that it was lacking. So we've got some ideal feedback here. We know exactly what sections they're referring to. And then we have less than ideal feedback, where we're kind of outlining what we don't want to see. The quality of the feedback and the thoroughness is what is going to make it useful. And as you see from the examples, this particular one, they simply listed the activities without indicating how this impacted the score. So that would not be suffice. For example, they wrote out garden, vegetable, and classroom activities, local carrots and potatoes, but we can't make out exactly what to do with that. We wouldn't be able to take that back to a reviewer, the grantee. So. Or even if we're trying to make out what that means. So, when you're looking at the reviewer's comments, if you would just kind of keep that in mind. Then there's another example where they wrote out great or good example. Once again, the thing with that is if they don't spell out what it is, we don't know exactly what is great. So it's important that the information is very specific. And then, of course, you are encouraged, because I see one here where there's a page number. You're encouraged to include page numbers. I feel like that makes the process go faster, especially if you're on a phone call that might only be half an hour to 2 hours. You want to be able to get through the calls fast. So if you have a thorough comment and then you write the page number, then that's just going above and beyond. But it'll speed up the process so you know where to go to in the application during your actual reconvening and meeting. So I do want to emphasize that is important. This will, let's see, and then you see where they wrote in a weakness. Seems like a waste of funds. So, we want to provide good feedback, specifically as to why something would not be good for the project, and not necessarily just, this isn't good. Does my feedback pass the test? So we've outlined some stuff here to help you determine if the feedback is good. So there's a few things you can look for and use to determine this. We've kind of outlined some questions here that will help you kind of think through it. You can look through this as a lead and just kind of keep that in mind. It says, is my feedback grammatically correct with appropriate punctuation? Is it clear and actionable? Is the feedback offensive? We don't want any offensive feedback. Does my feedback reflect that I have closely reviewed the material submitted by the applicant? And does the feedback align with the amount of points deducted? So again, if it's something that is going to impact the project at a larger scope, then you're going to score accordingly. But if it's something very minor, then the amount of points deducted should somewhat align with it. And I think that's something where if you're not sure, you can have a conversation with either myself or, one of our farm to school lead, Travis, and email us if you run into questions about that specifically. But just if you're consistent across the board in how you score, it works out. But you just have to make sure you use that consistency across the board when you're reviewing the applications. And then we have some more examples. So here there's an example of how the section would, I guess someone's trying to spell out how it's not good, but they're not telling us what's lacking details. So this is an example of what not to do. So this is a poor example. This section is vague and lack details. Well, although that is good to know, we don't really know exactly what. So if it's a budget section, they might emphasize exactly what is missing, or if whether there wasn't anything there, or something specific that they were looking for. And then here you've got something a little more elaborate where they're saying the more detail is needed to justify how each budget line was arrived at, especially travel and equipment. So now you're getting specific, or a little better. But an excellent comment would be something like more details is needed to justify how budget line items were estimated, especially travel and equipment. Travel costs appear to be excessive, and equipment needs to be purchased for the kitchen is not specified, and a justification was not included. Personnel costs for the farm to school staff position appear to be too low to attract and hire a qualified individual. So, this is very thorough. They know exactly why they basically got dinged in terms of scores. So that's what we're looking for, thorough feedback. And here are some more feedback examples. So, you want to make sure that we remain professional throughout the whole review process. So one of the things that we're emphasizing is, make sure it's clear and it's honest. Make sure it remains professional and that you don't provide mean or non-constructive feedback, as the example here where they're just saying the sustainability plan is weak. It appears that they believe everything will just work once they get the ball rolling. It is a bit too simple for the reality of a project like this. Nice, or something more constructive proposal would be strengthened with clarification of how ongoing support of project goals will be managed after the grant has ended with state and local funding. So just keep in mind that folks are reading the feedback, so it's important to, remain professional. And then reviewing the budget and budget narrative section. So when you get to the budget and budget narrative, there are some specific things that you will use to evaluate this section. We've outlined them here. It's also in the RFA, but basically there's some bullet points here. The budget narrative should discuss all the items listed in the itemized budget. The expenses do need to align with the project goals and objectives. So, if they're planting seeds and somewhere in there they should have an activity that aligns with that. And then anticipated project expenses are accounted for in the budget. The budget narrative should justify the cost. If a key partner receives portion of funding, rationale for partners' participation in the project should be provided. So those are some key things that you can kind of look through in terms of the budget. I would say, the narrative will tell you guys the story. The budget should align with whatever it is that they're proposing to do in their grant application. Don't deduct points, but flag the information in the comments in terms of some very specific stuff, like it says planning and implementation grant budgets didn't include line items for face-to-face meeting with the USDA personnel. So that's really important in terms of for the required ones. If you notice that they don't have the face-to-face USDA meeting, you can make a comment about that. But we are looking out for that, meaning our grant office, so you don't need to deduct points specifically for that. And if you notice a discrepancy in budget numbers, just make a note of it. We will be reviewing all that in terms of running the math. And the other thing we're emphasizing is don't determine if something is allowable. Again, if you're concerned about something, feel free to write a comment, but don't get caught up in that. We don't want you guys to worry about all that because it is a lot of budgets. We will do a thorough review before we award them. And a couple steps for a successful review. Here's some tips for that. When you receive your PartnerWeb username and password, make sure you can log on successfully by February 15. If you have issues logging on, contact the Farm to School email here for help. Also, make sure you scan your application. So you want to look through them, including the support letters, for conflict of interest. So you'll have some time, a little bit of cushion. Right now you don't know who they are, but if when you get the applications you realize, I have a conflict, you need to notify us immediately so we can do a swap. So we are asking that. It's one of the first things that all the reviewers do, and as a team lead, if you will kind of emphasize that as well, just with your team to make sure they didn't have any conflicts before we move forward. And we need to hopefully catch that at the very beginning so that then everybody can get the right applications if we do need to swap out something. During your individual review, you want to allocate at least 2 hours per application and spread them out across the period. You don't want to do is get to the end and then try to get them done because it is, it does take some time. So if you spread it out, it'll be a lot easier. We're asking that you complete your independent reviews by March 1st. And also, please notify us if you have any schedule changes or any conflicts, or if any of your group that's going to be part of your team has some sort of conflict, please notify us immediately so that we can work through that and figure something out. And then finally, be open to the opinions of others. We're working with the vast amount of people, and we want to make sure that we are able to do that. A couple more things. Make sure you check in on team member score sheets periodically so you have access to PartnerWeb. One of the things that you can do is go in there and check that to make sure that they are making progress. If you notice that someone is kind of at a stale and they have not moved forward, that might be a flag, that might be something you want to flag for us, or maybe find out from them to see if they're having some sort of issue or delay. And then also, if during the review team discussion, after everyone has had their individual time to score, folks decide to revise their score, please make sure that you support the changes with revised strengths and weaknesses as necessary. So again, this would typically happen after you reconvene for your meeting. And as a team, at that point, you would want to make sure that if there is that variance of 10 points that we were talking about, that you all, as a team, have a moment to talk and look through the applications. This is the opportunity you have to come closer so that range isn't way off in terms of the scoring. And again, we recommend you have PartnerWeb up during your team meeting so that you can update this as you're speaking. We don't want anybody to have to go do it after. So if you just work through them and you have your PartnerWeb up, it will make the process seamless and a lot easier. And now I'm going to turn it over to Travis for this next section and for this final part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carla. I really enjoyed listening to your section. I think those are some important tips that are going to help all of our grant reviewers be successful, and I look forward to seeing them in action during the review period. Now, who should you contact if you have any kind of issue? Well, if you have a problem with PartnerWeb, especially if you have an issue submitting scores or with logging in initially, you can reach out to us at the Farm to School email, farmtoschool@usda.gov. Hopefully this email is familiar to all of you. You should have been receiving communications throughout the preparation period. And if you have issues with PartnerWeb that we aren't able to help, or if you want to potentially arrive at a solution even more quickly, you can contact PartnerWeb support at this 800 number, and they should be able to speak to you in person and help you through your issue. If you're having a problem with WatchDocs and you are an implementation grant reviewer, contact Anna Aerosmith using her email address here. And if you are reviewing planning or training grants, you can contact Carla Garcia, who we just heard from, using her email address that is on the screen. If you have any issues with conflict of interest, please, again, want to emphasize, reach out as soon as possible to the Farm to School team at farmtoschool@usda.gov. And how can you best receive speedy assistance? Know and provide your team number and grant type. Clearly state the issue that you're experiencing and provide screenshots when applicable, especially if you're emailing the Farm to School team or one of the grants officers. And I want to remind everybody while we're in the Asking for Help section that you can ask for help right now. If you have a question that hasn't been answered throughout this webinar, you can post it in the chat box and we'll get to them in just a moment when we do Q&A. And give yourselves a big thumbs up for making it through this training. We've been at this for a while, and I know there's a lot of information, but each of you is more than capable of handling it, and I'm confident that all of you will perform your team lead jobs with a very high level of expertise. I'll briefly go over what we've talked about. There are only a couple of slides here in the next section, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. The team lead key dates. Now you can begin reviewing the RFA and the reference materials. We'll be sending out some information from the Farm to School inbox, or the Farm to School email, that will let you access the RFA, take a look at the score sheets, get familiar with all of these materials before you actually begin reviewing grants themselves. And then early next week, we ask that you make sure your PartnerWeb login is functioning, make sure that you can get to the applications from WatchDocs, and scan over the apps. I want to emphasize again, this means scan with your eyes. We want to keep the applications in WatchDocs and WatchDocs only for conflicts of interest. Contact farmtoschool@usda.gov with any conflict of interest issues. We can swap out those applications and have you reviewing correct applications in no time at all. By February 15th, it's the team lead's responsibility to schedule team calls. We will send out a Google spreadsheet where you'll be able to put in the information for when you want to speak to your team. And we'll also be sending out team assignments early enough that you'll be able to contact each of them by email. By February 22nd, this is the end of the first week of review. We ask that you check in on your team member score sheets, see how they're doing, make sure they are making progress and not saving the entire review until the last minute. And then by March 1st, every member of your team should have independently reviewed each of the proposals and submitted their scores and comments via PartnerWeb. You'll then have the weekend off, and then on March 4th, you'll be right back at it with your scheduled team meetings. These are the team meetings that we ask you to schedule by February 15th. You can conduct them via phone. If you want one large team meeting, you can do it that way. If you want several shorter team meetings, you can also choose that path. And by March 15th, we expect you to have adjusted your scores if there are any adjustments necessary and made all of your comments via PartnerWeb. By early April, we'll have a reviewer feedback survey. And again, I want to emphasize that we have incorporated information from this survey into the way that we write the request for applications, including shorter narrative proposals, or shorter proposal narratives, and fewer attachments in the form of resumes and letters of support. This is my contact information. In case you've forgotten since we started, my name is Travis Hearn. I work in the Office of Community Food Systems. You can reach out to the Farm to School team using farmtoschool@usda.gov, or you can call me using this phone number if you have any urgent questions. I'll now be taking a look at the chat box. If you have anything that maybe didn't get addressed during the presentation, if you have any lingering questions, please enter them there and we'll get to them as quickly as we can. Someone asks, will we be letting you know if we do not have your conflict of interest form? Yes, we can absolutely do that. We are happy to confirm that everyone's had their conflict of interest form submitted. If you're not sure, you can go ahead and reach out to the Farm to School inbox and we'll check for you. It's very easy for us. We can take care of that very quickly. There's another question about referencing these instructions. Are there written instructions, or do we go back to this webinar for info? There's no need to watch the entire webinar again. We will be sending out the slides. The instructions will also be contained on PartnerWeb. So when you log into PartnerWeb, you should see the information that you need to make sure that you can access everything. And the sections on the left side on the sidebar are clearly labeled Step 1 and Step 2, and that should help you identify the process also. We have a question about the team lead checklist. Does that acknowledge that all team members followed the checklist, or is this a reflection of the team lead's individual checklist? So for the team lead for the checklist, for the activities checklist, this is not actually a checklist about whether the team is performing all of their responsibilities or anything like that. It is a document that is filled out along with the application, and it is supposed to reflect the information that's contained within the application. So you'll see on that checklist there will be a number of activities that could potentially appear in a Farm to School grant application. And then if you see any of those activities in the applications you're reviewing, you will check them off on that document. The team lead is the only, and again, the team lead is the only person responsible for filling out an activity checklist. So they should have one activity checklist for each application. What happens if a team member disappears during the process or is otherwise unresponsive after the rest of the team has scored their proposals? Well, my input is that we really expect this not to happen, that if anyone has a conflict with the review process, they'll let us know up front. I encourage anyone who's on this webinar, if you're listening live or if you're on the recording and you know that you're going to be on leave for a part of the period or anything like that, please let us know. I also want to ask Carla if she has any input. If there's a team member that's just unresponsive and is unreachable, do you have any information you'd like to share about that scenario?
Yeah, I mean, I think for starters, we would definitely need to be notified as soon as possible so that we can take action. I think, we're not expecting you guys to have to resolve that other than to try to reach out to them initially and document that you've tried maybe contacting them via phone and an email, so then we can follow up ourselves. So we would take it from there. Just the tip I would have is, one, reach out to them and then definitely reach out to FNS, myself, or Travis, so that we can act on that right away and figure out either a resolution. I mean, we've had people that have had funerals and, massive emergencies. So if you will let us know, we will handle it, and we've had to pull in other folks. That doesn't happen, but sometimes it does happen. So the sooner you reach out to us, the sooner we can either reach out to their supervisor. We would deal with all that ourselves. We're not expecting you guys to take that on. So recommendation would be just follow up with them. If they're not responsive, let us know that you've reached out and they have not responded. So that we can go ahead and move forward with that and find out what's going on. Thanks.
Thanks, Carla. And I will also ask for your help on this next question. If there is a shutdown, will there be any communication with the teams prior to shutdown as to what to expect after we return? Getting information out to those that submit applications and what they should expect. This is a really excellent question. I will say that we are operating as if the process will proceed normally, and these dates that we've set out are the dates that we are expecting to conduct the review process. This is a difficult question to answer, and if I'm able to receive additional guidance on it, it's something that I can address after this presentation.
Yeah, I think it's hypothetical. So since we don't know right now, we're moving forward as if everything is marching with those dates. So just keep that in mind. Right now, these are the dates, and if we need to reconvene, then we would definitely reconvene later. But right now, we're just moving forward with the information we've got. And if we do have new information, I'm pretty sure we'd put out an email, Travis, right before we go on, if anything were to happen. But I hope not.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and we have another very good question. Does farmtoschool@usda.gov work the same way as farmtoschool@fns.usda.gov? This is a really good question. I believe everywhere in this presentation I've written farmtoschool@usda.gov, but if not, I can alter that before we send out the slides. We prefer that you use farmtoschool@usda.gov. There is a move towards using this suffix for emails, and we are trying to accommodate that initiative. But if you send an email address to either, for the time being, if, say, your email auto-completes to farmtoschool@fns.usda.gov, it will go to the same inbox. So in that sense, yes, they are the same. Okay, we have just reached 3 o'clock. If there is a last-minute question, I would be able to answer it now. But if not, we have taken up the amount of time that we promised. So I am preparing to stop the recording and end this webinar. I will download the recording and have it distributed to everybody as soon as possible. Look for it either this afternoon or tomorrow morning. If you have not received it by the end of the day Friday, reach out to us. We may have not included your email or had an incorrect email recorded for you for some reason. Everyone should have received a link to view the webinar recording by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. If not, please reach out to the Farm to School inbox. And with that, I will conclude this presentation. I want to say a thank you again to everybody who's joining us live. And if you are watching on the recording, thank you so much for going back and watching this presentation. I look forward to beginning the review process with you. And as always, you can reach out to us with any questions at farmtoschool@usda.gov. Thank you very much.